Shalom Aleichem, and welcome to Ḥokhmat ha-Ḥodhesh, where we explore Jewish time, wisdom, and practice through the Hebrew calendar. I am your host, Yosef Lopez. We have arrived at Nisan, and Nisan is not a quiet month. So first, I would like to wish everyone a Shana Tova, Tzizku L'Shnim Rabot. If you remember, the Torah calls it ha-Ḥokhmat, the first month, even though it falls seventh in our civil year of counting. This tension is speaking to something greater. Nisan announces a different kind of beginning. Not the beginning of the world, which belongs to Tishri, but the beginning of us, of Am Yisrael as a people, shaped and defined by a momentous exodus from slavery to autonomy. But before we enter the ideas of this month, we do what we always do. We begin with the name, Nisan. It is the name the Jewish calendar uses for this first of months, and it is, to be precise, like usual, a Babylonian name. As we know, the Hebrew calendar acquired the names of its months during the Babylonian exile, and Nisan derives from the Akkadian Nisanu, the first month of the Babylonian year as well. The Chachamim were aware of this. The Yerushalmi notes directly that the names of the months came up with Israel from Babel. This is not a source of embarrassment, it's a source of instruction. The Jewish intellectual tradition has never been afraid to engage with the wider world's vocabulary, so long as it is clear about what it is doing with that vocabulary, what it is keeping, what it's transforming, and why. So what did Nisanu mean in its original Babylonian context? The Babylonian Nisanu was the month of the great New Year festival, the Akitu, I believe. And its heart was the recitation of a text called the Enuma Elish, which is the Babylonian creation epic, in which the chief god Marduk defeats the chaos monster Tiamat and splits her body to form the heavens and the earth. And it is then that he is enthroned as king of the gods. Each year at this festival, that cosmic drama was reenacted. The gods assembled in council. The king of Babylonia underwent a ritual humiliation before the statue of Marduk. His scepter and crown were taken from him. He was struck across the face, and he declared himself innocent of any wrongdoing against the god, before being restored to his throne with divine authorization. The message here is clear and deliberate. All earthly power flows downward from the gods. The cosmos is a hierarchy. The king rules because the gods permit it, and every year that hierarchy must be ritually reconfirmed, lest chaos reassert itself. It is mired in violence and domination. This is the backdrop against which our Torah makes a declaration about this very month. And this month shall be for you the beginning of months. It is the first of months of the year for you. Borei Olam announces the calendar to Moses and Aaron while still in Egypt, before the Exodus has even happened. And the first thing he establishes is that this month, this Babylonian Nisanu, this month of Marduk's enthronement in cosmic hierarchy, belongs to you. not to the king, not to the gods of Egypt. Lakhem, for you. The calendar itself now is an act of liberation. Where a slave has no time to rule for themselves, the first action that God gives us is to rule time for ourselves. This month is not used to relegitimate the vertical order of the cosmos. Gods above, king beneath them, people beneath the king. The Torah uses it to inaugurate a people who stand in direct covenant with the Creator, without a divine king, priest, or someone else as an intermediary, without cosmic hierarchy to sanction earthly power. The exodus that takes place in this month is not simply a national escape. It is a comprehensive repudiation of the entire mythological-political structure that pagan society, and namely Babylonia and the Akitu, was designed to reinforce every year. Babylon used Nisanu to tell a story about a cosmos held in place by divine violence, ritually renewed each year by a king groveling before his god. The Torah uses Nisan to tell a different story entirely, about a people who emerged from the house of slaves, who crossed a sea on dry land, and who are now walking night and day toward the mountain where they will hear the voice of God speaking directly to them, without any king between them and the source. Same name, entirely different world. This month, we are exploring two Hebrew words that sit at the very center of everything Nisan asks of us. Ḥeruth, which we'll translate as autonomy, sometimes translated as freedom, and Abduth, bondage, servitude, slavery. By the end, we will hopefully not see these as mere abstractions. They describe real conditions of the human soul and of human society. And as we will see, the Torah's understanding of them is far more precise and far more demanding than what passes for these words in the wider conversation around us. We'll also return to a theme we touched on during Kislev, the bayith, the household, because it turns out that you cannot understand the Exodus without it. We will look at the mezuzah on our doorposts and ask, what is it really doing there? We will spend time with the Agada and think carefully about what kind of document it actually is. And hopefully we'll clear up some common misunderstandings about the counting of the Omer, because the practical life of the month matters just as much as these ideas behind it. So, let us begin. The Exodus narrative opens in Egypt, but it does not open with slavery, not yet. It opens with a household, where translated as, and these are the names of the children of Israel who came down to Egypt, a man and his household. You can find that in the book of Shemoth, chapter 1, verse 1. Every family came down to Egypt already formed, already organized, already carrying an interior identity. They were the Beth Yaakov, the household of Jacob, a living structure of relationships, responsibilities, and dignity. What Egypt did, any system of domination does, was not simply to put chains upon people's bodies. It dissolved the household. It turned persons into units of labor. And here's the Torah's deepest point about slavery. In an enslaved society, slavery does not announce itself. It presents itself as the natural order of things. All of Egypt was one great Beit Avadim, a house of slaves, not a house of slavery, but a house of slaves, from the lowliest laborer to the highest official. Even Pharaoh himself, as the rabbis noted, was not truly free. A tyrant lives in the grip of an anxiety that can tip at any moment into madness. The Hebrew word Abduth comes from the root line bet daled, which means both to work and to serve. In itself, work and service are not degrading. The same root describes the avodah, the divine service in the temple. The problem is not the labor. The problem is the labor has been stripped of its meaning, cut off from its purpose, and placed entirely at the disposal of another's will. That is Abduth, the condition of a person who has ceased to be an end in himself and has become a tool. And the Torah's most unsettling observation is this: people in a state of bondage often do not recognize it. The philosopher David Nassy, writing in the late 18th century, put it sharply. Quote, "Liberty is the most favored word of our generation, used at every instance, but without knowing what it means. Others imagine that they have already shaken off the yoke of slavery. I believe they never had felt its weight." Unquote. What he is describing is his contemporaries in Europe and the Caribbean, but he could have been describing any generation. The opening declaration of the Haggadah makes exactly this point. This year, here, slaves. Not once we were slaves. We may be slaves now. And the first act of freedom is to recognize it. And here, we might pause to consider the myth of Sisyphus, who is condemned by the gods to roll a boulder up a hill for all eternity, only to watch it roll back down, and to begin again forever. Albert Camus understands and interprets the myth with the following conclusion. One must imagine Sisyphus happy. The heroic response to an inescapable condition, he argues, is to embrace it, to own it, to find one's dignity precisely within the repetition that cannot be escaped. It is a serious and honest attempt to grapple with suffering. But from the Torah's perspective, it is also a very precise description of what Egypt looked like from the inside, and why it was so difficult to leave. Sisyphus has stopped asking whether the boulder needs to be there. He has made his peace with the hill. This is what David Nassy meant when he wrote that people cry out for liberty without ever having felt the weight of the yoke. Camus' Sisyphus has felt the weight and decided that it is simply the human condition. The Torah says that the decision to embrace the illusion is itself the deepest form of Abduth. The Israelites in Egypt wept not because they had resigned themselves to bondage, but because they had not. That refusal to accept, that cry, is what Scripture records as the moment God heard them and remembered his covenant. Ḥeruth begins not with escape, but with the refusal to call the boulder happiness. This brings us to Ḥeruth. The rabbinic tradition designates Pesach as Zeman Simchatenu, the season of our autonomy, the season of our freedom. But what exactly is Ḥeruth? It is not lawlessness. It is not the freedom to do whatever you wish. That is not freedom. That is simply a different form of servitude, this time to appetite and whim and impulse. The Mishnah in Abduth says there is no free person except one who occupies himself with Torah. Freedom, in the Jewish understanding, is the condition of living according to reason and law, answerable to a standard that transcends the whims of any individual ruler or collective mood. It is full responsibility and autonomy. Haham Hosef Haor draws this distinction with great clarity. The Hebrew people were the first people in history to recognize their own bondage and to seek freedom under law. Most peoples throughout history experienced slavery as a natural condition, something like the weather. Israel alone insisted it was not natural. It was a violation, and the instrument of their liberation was not simply escape, but it was covenant, a binding commitment to a law that no king could override, and that conferred equal dignity on every person who stood with them at Sinai. This is why the ritual of the Seder HaAgada, the Passover meal, is structured the way it is. The word Seder means order, arrangement. It is the antithesis of lawlessness. In Egypt, the Israelites were subject to arbitrary violence, the very definition of a society without genuine law. The Seder insists that order is not the enemy of freedom. It is its foundation. You sit at the table as a free person. You recline, you eat slowly, you drink 4 cups in a measured way, as the sages say, b'derech Ḥeruth, in the manner of free people. The point is not what you eat and drink, but it is how you eat and drink. The same masa that was the bread of oppression and a symbol of our slavery becomes on this night the bread of liberation, not by changing its substance, but by how it is received. In Kislev, we spent time with the theme of the Bayit, the household as the site where Jewish identity is formed, protected, and transmitted. The Hanukkah lights go on the doorpost or outside the door because the household is the unit of observance, the unit of memory, the unit of resistance. Nisan deepens this. The connection between the Bayit and the Exodus is foundational to our survival and ability to thrive. When God commanded the Israelites to prepare for the final plague, the death of the firstborn, He did not address them as individuals. He addressed them as households. The Pesach lamb was to be taken for a household, as it says, a lamb for a household, a lamb for a house. If a household was too small, it was to combine with a neighboring household, not with random strangers, but with nearby families, forming a community of households. Be eaten. Lamb was to be eaten in a single house. And on that night, the divine protection passed over not individual Israelites, but batim, houses. Chapter 12, verse 36 reads, "Lot hotzi min habayit min habasar hutza, lo tishberu bo." This is translated in the Aramaic by Ankylos as "Bahabura hada itahel lakafek min bata min bisira limara qarma lot bonde." So the Aramaic Targum renders bayit, a single house, with the word habura, or habura, which means a corporation, an association of individuals bound. by shared purpose and shared responsibility. And this is precisely what the Jewish family has always been. Not merely a sentimental arrangement, but a legal entity, an institution, a corporation. It is by virtue of being organized as a household that the Israelites merited liberation. Cannot leave Egypt alone. This will take us to what demarcates our bayit, our house. That is the mezuzah. Every Jewish home has one. It's a small case on the doorpost containing a parchment scroll. It's become the custom of many people to kiss it when they enter and when they leave, hitting it with the hand, bring it to the mouth. It sort of then fades into the familiar, the background, almost invisible. But once you understand what it actually is, you cannot look at it the same way again. To understand the mezuzah, we have to go back to Egypt. On the night of the final plague, God commanded the Israelites to take the blood of the Pesach lamb and to paint it or to smear it on the doorposts, the two doorposts and the lintel of every house in which they were eating. That blood was a sign, and it was transformed into a subversive stand for autonomy and monotheism. The rabbis understood our doorposts of Egypt to have functioned as an altar of sorts. The smearing of blood corresponded to the general sacrificial procedure of applying blood to the altar, as it would be done in the Mishkan and later in the temple. Our home then became, in that moment, a sacred precinct. We altered the home, if you will, from something mundane to a truly unique space. And God's promise here is explicit. When he saw the blood on the lintel and the two doorposts, he would protect the door, he would protect the home, and not permit the destroyer to enter. The mezuzah becomes the permanent successor to that act. The rabbis made this connection with full legal force of the Rasha because they understood this ancient Pesach ceremony. As the model for the mezuzah, they applied the laws governing the mezuzah to the original blood ceremony as well, which is why, for instance, the obligation extended to the rooms where people slept, not only the room where the lamb was consumed. But here's what makes this connection so symbolically rich. Look at what has changed and what has stayed the same. For example, with the Matzah, the substance of the original event is preserved. It is still unleavened bread, Lakhem oni, as we call it, a poor person's bread. But the mode of eating it changes entirely. It is no longer b'chipazon, it's no longer in haste and affliction, but now reclining in the manner of freedom. With the mezuzah, the opposite logic applies. The mode is preserved. It still goes on the doorpost, the same place where the blood was placed. But the substance has been radically transformed. Blood has become scripture. It is not a simple substitution for practicality. Hacham Faor reads it as one of the most deliberate theological statements in the entire structure of Jewish law. The ultimate bond between God and Israel is not to be found in sacramental blood, but in the law. What marks the Jewish home as protected is not a ritual substance applied to wood. It is the words of the covenant written on parchment and placed where every person who enters and exits will encounter them. And the specific texts chosen to embody this national reminder are not random. The two passages from Devarim, chapters 6, verses 4 through 9, and chapter 11, verses 13 to 21, the same first two paragraphs of the Kiryat Shema, contain the Tetragrammaton, which is the name of God, explicitly 10 times. The rabbis noted this with care. The protection effected by God upon seeing the blood during the 10 plagues finds its echo in the 10 appearances of the divine name in the Mezuzah. The same God who acted through those 10 plagues, whose name resounded through each one, now inscribes his presence on the threshold of every Jewish household in every generation. What then is the mezuzah doing for the person who passes it? Harambam answers this with absolute simplicity and precision. And his answer is a necessary corrective to what has become the most widespread misunderstanding about this mitzvah. The purpose of the mezuzah, he writes, is to remind a person each time they enter and exit their home of the unity of God, of knowledge of Him, and of love of Him. This reminder is designed to strengthen a person's spiritual footing against the pressures and distractions of everyday life, the storms that buffet a person the moment they cross the threshold and re-enters what many call the outside world. And then Maimonides says something that stops you in your tracks. Only when a person cultivates the intellectual bond between themselves and God will they be truly protected, not through separated angelic forces operating on their behalf, but through the clarity of your own intellect and the purity of your own thought. The mezuzah is not a magical charm. The protection it offers is inseparable from the person's own inner condition, from whether they have actually internalized the text the text that it is housing and what they are saying. The Shema on the parchment is not a magic writing. It is a proposition about reality that the person is invited to make their own every time they cross that threshold. This is why Harambam is unsparing about the popular practices of inscribing additional divine names of angels on the outside of the or in the inside for sure, or inserting extra text to amplify its protective power. Those who do this have not added to the mitzvah. They have dissolved it. They have turned something whose whole purpose is the intellectual and spiritual engagement into an amulet, something that works from the outside on the body without requiring anything of the heart or the mind. The blood on the doorpost in Egypt was a sign placed there by God's command for one night, marking the boundary between life and death, between the household of Israel and the general catastrophe of Egypt. The mezuzah is what that sign becomes in the life of a free people. Permanent, text-bearing, intellectually demanding, renewed every time a person chooses to engage with what it says rather than merely passing beneath it. Our thresholds and our boundaries matter only if we are willing to recognize them and protect them. What the mezuzah declares, if we are willing to engage, is not a sacrificial sign in blood. It is a covenantal commitment in words, and the protection it offers flows through the mind of the person who takes those words seriously. Now, let us speak about the Haggadah, because it is one of the most misunderstood texts in Jewish life. Many people think of it simply as the script for a ritual meal, something to get through at varying speeds depending on how hungry the family is. But that is to miss what it actually is, and more importantly, how it does what it does. Every culture transmits its values and collective experiences to future generations. But each culture has its own distinct system for doing so. What makes the Hebrew system remarkable is something that ha-Ḥodhesh describes as encoding and decoding. An original event, something that actually happened in real time and space, is not simply recorded and replayed. It is encoded into a form that future generations can receive, decode, and retransmit. And crucially, the encoded form is never identical to the original. It necessarily involves change and transformation. As it says at the beginning of the Seder, ma nishtana halayla ha-zeh, often translated incorrectly as, why is this night different? But should be translated instead as, what has been changed? The goal of the decoding process is not to reproduce the original slavishly, but to recover its living sense and then to re-encode it again for the generation that follows. This is built into the Hebrew language itself. For example, the root shin nun he means at once to repeat and to change. Shana, it comes from Mishnah, the authoritative formulation of the oral law. Mishneh Torah, a repetition or second to the Torah, the title Harambam chose for the code of Jewish law. And Devarim itself, Deuteronomy, the fifth book of the Torah, which the rabbis understood as at once the end of the written law and the beginning of the oral, the thread joining them both. They are not copies. All of them are transformations that carry the original forward while being genuinely distinct from it. The Haggadah is exactly this kind of Mishneh text. The commandment in Shemoth, chapter 13, verse 8 says, and you shall tell your child, your son, on that day. The word used, the commandment in Shemoth, chapter 13, verse 8 says, "V'higavta livnecha bayom ha'u lemor, babor zeh asa Adonai li v'etziti Mitzrayim," and you shall tell your son on that day, it is because of what God did for me when I went free from Egypt. The word used here, v'higavta, is from the root non gimel valid, to bring forward, to make present, to articulate. But the mechanism of that telling is given in the very next chapter of Devarim, and you shall repeat to them, to your children, and you shall speak of them. Rabbi Elias ben Amozig observes something essential here. If the intention had been simple, verbatim recitation, the Torah would have said, read, not repeat, not speak. Because these are different acts. Reading is the reproduction of a fixed text. Repeating and speaking involve engaging with it, transforming it into something the listener can grasp and carry forward with their own understanding. This is why the Seder is built around questions and conversation. Why everyone at the table is a participant rather than an audience. Why the rabbis in the Haggadah, Bnei Barak, who stayed up all night discussing the Exodus, We're modeling something essential rather than merely demonstrating some sort of unusual piety. The Haggadah is not a script to be performed. It is a set of themes to be developed. The word seder, as we described before, order and arrangement, tells us that it's the topics of a discourse to be expanded by the participants. In the same way, the Siddur gives the presenter or the reader the themes they develop in their own prayer. The oral tradition is alive precisely because it demands this kind of active engagement. Consider now what this means for the contrast between Jewish memory and other forms of cultural transmission. Islam, for example, insists that the Quran may not be translated. It must be transmitted in Arabic, one direction, with no transformation permitted. The movement is always from the people toward the text, never the other way around. And on the other hand, Christianity went the opposite direction. It permitted translation, but severed the organic connection to an original text. It has no authoritative Hebrew text of the Old Testament, quote unquote. The original Aramaic words of Jesus were not preserved. Translation there became a suppression of the original trace, rather than its living continuation. Judaism does something neither does. It insists on the original text. That is what we call Masorah. It is a Masorah that is rigorously protected, in which every word is accountable at the level of the letter, and it officially recognizes translation and interpretation. It was organically continuous with it. The Targum, which is the Aramaic rendering of the Torah, that used to be read aloud in the synagogue, is classified as oral Torah. The rabbis taught that both the second tablets and the broken pieces of the first were deposited together in the ark. You do not erase what came before when you move forward. You carry both. This is the Haggadah's deepest structure. It carries the Masa, the bread of affliction, and transforms it into the bread of freedom without changing what it is. It carries the memory of slavery and transforms it into the experience of liberation without pretending the slavery never happened. It carries the text of Scripture and encodes it into a living conversation at the table without replacing the text with the conversation. And what memory does it transmit? Not nostalgia, not archaeology. The Haggadah itself insists. ובכל דור ודור חייב אדם להרוס את עצמו כאילו הוא יצא ממצרים. In each and every generation, each person is obligated to show themselves, not see himself, but to show himself as though he himself went out from Egypt. This is not a metaphor. It is an instruction. The Exodus is not a story about people who lived a long time ago. It is a description of the human condition, of bondage, of the capacity to recognize that bondage, and of the possibility of liberation under law. The encoding is renewed at every Seder table. The decoding is the work of every generation. Our transmission continues only as long as people take their seat at the table, though, and actually engage. The national memory of Israel cannot be restored by historians or poets working from the outside of the tradition. It lives inside the practice of the people. Inside the Agadah's questions, inside the household's conversation, inside the mitzvot that code the original events, and invite each and every generation to decode them anew. It either expands through transmission, or it contracts and eventually ceases. I don't want to seem like this is some sort of bleak warning from the outside. It is the internal logic of what Shana means. Repetition that does not transform is not repetition, it is reproduction. And reproduction in a living tradition is the first step toward forgetting. Now, from the second night of Pesach, we engage in a yearly mitzvah called the counting of the Omer. This is a simple mitzvah. It's a period of 49-day count that carries us from the liberation toward Shemoth, to the next holiday, from the Exodus toward the giving of the Torah at Sinai, which is the culmination of the Exodus. The counting is a Torah-level obligation, according to Harambam, performed each night with a beracha. That beracha is Asher Kiddushanu Milusotav Siwanu Al Sefirat HaOmer. Now, before we discuss the laws of this counting, we need to say something about the character of this period, because there is a widespread assumption that needs to be gently but firmly set aside. Many people today experience the Omer as a time of doom and gloom. Weddings are avoided, music is restricted, people don't shave, a mode of semi-mourning settles over the calendar. And people accept this as simply how things are. Yeah, it's as though sadness were the native atmosphere of these 7 weeks. It is not. The opposite is true. The Omer period is one of the most joyful stretches in the entire Jewish year. Just for a moment, think about what it actually is. It is the height of spring, moving into early summer in the land of Israel. The season the Torah associates with first fruits, with the earth's abundance, with the renewal of life after the rains. It is a period of anticipation, 49 days of building expectation for the greatest event in Jewish history, the theophany at Sinai, the moment God spoke to an entire nation. Every day of counting is a day closer to that. The weeks of the Omer are, by their own inner logic, weeks of ascent. The Agadah, we read, closes with a declaration that echoes across everything we have been discussing. Shata ha-Zeh, l'shaha ata b'nei Horeg. Excuse me. This year, here slaves. Next year, free people. That movement from bondage towards freedom does not end at the Seder table. It continues through every night of the count. The Omer is the walk between Egypt and Sinai. It is not a corridor of grief. It is a journey of a people coming into themselves. The sadness and restriction that many communities associate with this period today are the residue of historical trauma, of persecutions, massacres, and the accumulated wounds of exile that settled into the psyche and transformed the calendar and hardened into custom over centuries. We don't dismiss that history lightly, but we must be honest about what it is. It is the mark of exile in the Jewish body. not the original character of the season. This connects directly to what Ḥeruth actually demands of us. To be free and autonomous means, among other things, to be free from defining yourself the lens of what was done to you. Trauma has its own form of Abduth. It chains a person and a people to the worst moments of their past and makes those moments the measure of everything that follows. The free person does not forget what happened, carries it. The ark carried both the whole tablets and the broken pieces. He does not let it set the emotional register of his whole life. We are still in exile. There's no doubt about that. No one looks honestly at the world and can pretend that it's otherwise. But exile does not have to mean the suspension of cultural responsibility. We have the capacity, we have the obligation to restore what belongs to us, to exercise our right to be free, and to approach the counting of the Omer as it was always meant to be. A season of joy, of growth, of anticipation, of the slow and deliberate walk of a free people toward the mountain where they received the Torah. We will explore this in much greater depth in our ER episode for next month. But for now, let this suffice. Count the Omer with happiness. Let the weeks build. Let the anticipation grow. Do not allow a borrowed sorrow to color what is, at its heart, one of the most beautiful stretches of the Jewish year. Now, something comes up every year with regards to the Omer that causes unnecessary anxiety, and it deserves a direct answer. What happens if you forget to count one night or 2 nights, however many nights? What if you skip a night? So the widespread popular practice, particularly in the Orthodox and Ashkenazic communities, holds that once you have missed a night, you must continue counting for the remainder of the Omer without a beracha, on the grounds that the count is a single continuous obligation, and once the chain is broken, it cannot be restored, and therefore any subsequent counting must be said without a blessing. Now, Harambam, Maimonides, rules differently, and he rules so explicitly in a responsa that he wrote regarding the issue. It's made available to us online, you can read it, but I will try to teach it here. The question put to him was precise. If a person forgot one night or 2, or does he recite the beracha on subsequent nights or not? His answer, simple and precise. What has passed cannot be recovered, but from the night they remember, he counts with a beracha for all remaining nights. The only adjustment that he might make is on the final night when he says that it's been 7 weeks. He would omit the words timimoth, or he wouldn't say it's been 7 complete weeks, because strictly speaking, the weeks are no longer complete and uninterrupted. So he would say instead, today is 49 days, which are 7 weeks of the Omer. That is the sole concession to what was missed. The reasoning is straightforward. Rambam understands each night's counting as an independent fulfillment of the mitzvah, not as a single, unbroken chain in which each link depends on the one missing before. Missing one night, you missed it. You cannot go back in time and fulfill it. But it does not disqualify the beracha on the nights that follow. Any more than missing one day of tefillin means you cannot say a beracha the next morning. This is the teaching of Rambam. It is grounded in the ruling of in the words of the Mishnah Torah and of the Talmud. If you have missed a night or several, do not allow a stringency to prevent you from completing the count with full honor. Pick it up from where you are, say your beracha, and count. You should know that the Omer does not ask you. You should know that not saying the beracha also does not disqualify the mitzvah itself. The mitzvah is not dependent on reciting a blessing, but on doing the actual. So, pick up again from where you left off. Shata haddah avde lashata dehata v'nechore. This year here, slaves. Next year, a free people. We began this episode with two words, Ḥeruth and Abduth. And we have followed them through the name of the month, the household, the doorpost, the Agadah, the counting of the Omer. So let's close by drawing the thread together. The Torah's vision of freedom is not merely the absence of chains. It is the positive condition of a person and a people who live inside a covenant, who have households ordered by values rather than by fear, who transmit a living memory from one generation to the next, and who mark their thresholds with the declaration that this is a space of relationship, of covenant with Borei Olam. The Babylonian reset of the cosmic hierarchy every year was essential because without that annual renewal, the whole structure risked collapse. Our observance of the rituals of Nisan does something entirely different. It does not relegitimate power from the top down. It reactivates memory from the inside out. Every household, every table, every cup of wine drunk in the manner of free people is a reenactment not of domination, but of covenant. The mezuzah on our doorposts say, we know the difference between the house of slaves and the house of the free. The Haggadah, the table says, we have not forgotten, and we will not forget. And the nightly count of the Omer declares we are still walking, still ascending, still moving towards Sinai. And the Seder's careful order says freedom is not chaos. It is the most disciplined thing in the world. The Haggadah closes with the hope. L'shana ba b'Yerushalayim. Next year in Jerusalem. It is not to be confused with some sort of wistful statement of hope never to be truly realized. It is the second dimension of Ḥeruth that the Haggadah's opening line encodes. Personal awareness of bondage must be joined to the political and territorial aspiration of a people with a home. Freedom is individual and collective, inward and outward, present and future all at once. May this Nisan find you at a table full of questions. May the Masa taste different this year once you know what it carries. May the mezuzah at your door remind you every time you pass it of what side of the threshold you have chosen to stand on. And may the counting of the Omer be for you what it always was meant to be. Not a period of mourning, but 49 days of a free people walking toward the mountain, ready to receive the Torah. Thank you for listening. If you'd like to support this podcast, you can find us on Patreon under Horizontal Media, where your generosity helps sustain this podcast and the type of Torah scholarship that has always been supported by the community. Shanim Rabov. A joyful festival to you and your household.